up your engine! Okay, Pontiac Fiero. People laughed them as joke cars. They only made them for a very short period of time. This one's a 1988, the last year they made them. This is a very special one. Now, the original four-banger had a whopping 92 horsepower. And if you went up to their top-of-the-line V6, you could get 144. Unfortunately, most of them were made with the 4 cylinders with an automatic transmission that couldn't get out of their own way. They had a top speed of 102, but you basically had to be going downhill for that. But this is a bird of a different feather. This has had a 3800 engine put in with a supercharger, custom-made header and exhaust, and this is what it sounds like. Been built up, and it was built up really well, but all things considered, it's a fun car that you don't have to put a ton of money in. He bought it years ago for $5,000. This one puts out 310 at the wheel, not at the crank, at the wheel. Now, one of the big problems of the original Fieros was a lot of them started on fire. The reason they started on fire is because they had little bitty 4-cylinder engines with 92 horses, and being a sporty car with a mid-engine design, guys would drive them hard, and then they'd throw a rod, knock a hole in the engine, the oil would get on the exhaust, start a fire, and woof, up they'd go. And a lot of them had overheating problems for 2 reasons. One, if some idiot jacked it up and jacked it on the coolant tubes, because realize your engine's in the back but the radiator's in the front, and if you crush those tubes, you're not going to get coolant, your engine's going to overheat, and plus, if you know the average American, they don't do much maintenance. So, since these have the cool wedged front, the radiator's got to be canted at an angle. They have cooling fans that work quite well when the fans work. But, being a GM product, if the fans stopped working, the engines would overheat and kaput. It wasn't the car's fault. That's more of a maintenance thing. But still, since Americans don't maintain things that well, didn't really jive that well with public, who had an image of, oh, they're horribly built cars. But that said, they sold 370,000 of these in a 5-year period they made them. You want to compare it with Toyota MR2, which people like, being a Toyota, same period of time, they sold less than 170,000 of them. So these way outsold those. They're both mid-engine cars, and really, if you wanted to have some fun, especially if you had the D-Trag standard transmission, even with a little 92 horsepower, you could still have some fun. It's a light car. It's a composite body. Now, it still has steel frames, so there's plenty of support in it. And speaking of steel frames, if you're going to buy one of these used, you don't have to worry about rust in the composite, but you do in the frame. This one's got a totally clean frame, but if you live up north, check that frame if you're buying one. If it's rusted, run away. Don't even think about it. You'd have to restore the whole thing and put too much money in. No, even I have to say, come on, it's an old car, but it's still sharp looking. There's no arguing that. It was the shape of things to come, the wedge shape. And it was the first mid-engine car that GM had built since like 1938. So really, it wasn't that bad of an idea. But there was one gigantic problem with these cars, and that's called capitalism. Over the period that these things were made, it's been estimated that GM lost on average about $2,000 per car selling these things. So if you're losing money making a car, it just doesn't make any sense. So their bad reputation up north, yes, they're probably all rusted away, but here in Tennessee, if you find them and they're not rusted, you can have a great sleeper car. The owner of this, when you consider the lightweight and the 305 horsepower of the rear wheels, he can blow Mustangs away. They think, oh, it's a Fiero, you know? He'd have to be kind of quiet though, because that sound, it doesn't sound like a Fiero. It does sound more like a Mustang. If they don't know and they pull up to him, he can just blow the doors off him in this thing. And yeah, he's got some money invested in it, but overall, with the car and everything he added in, $18,000, what's that today? You can't even get a new Toyota Corolla for $18,000. And it's certainly a blast from the past, but I like the pop-up headlights to give it a little bit of class. You know, now everything is all plastic, wrap around, you name it. Hey, things had more style back in the day. And you really can't beat that emblem. It has class. Take it for a spin. Now the interesting thing here, as you can see, is it's all stock. It looks totally like a normal Fiero. And isn't it fun to fool people? It's still got the original tape deck with auto reverse. Ooh, what technology. As you can see, when you step on the gas, you can hear that supercharger whine. And yes, it stays in a straight line too. It's got a decent suspension system on it. Didn't get squirrely. The engine, transmission all in the back. It's got good handling characteristics. Mind you, with all the horsepower this thing has, the front end does have a tendency of popping up while the back goes down. Considering that the front end weighs 800 pounds, but the rear weighs 1,400 pounds. Not the perfect weight ratio like in a Porsche. I mean, this is kind of the American poor man's Porsche. Now, if you want to just take off from a little rolling start here, you can see that the front end does pop up a little bit with all that power in the back. I have to say, it is a regular Fiero. You can hear things rattling while you go down the road. It kind of gives it that little bit of hominess and reality that you're in a GM product, knowing that things will rattle. And all that power, normally you think it's going to come at a big cost. This insurance is only $250 a year because it's a classic car. You get a classic car, you can get low insurance on it. I got customers with vets, the same thing. And some of them have a limitation, you can only drive them 5,000 miles a year, but hey, that's still a lot of miles, you know. You're not buying a car like this and going cross country. That's not what it's for. And on a cold day like today, you got your vents letting the heat come out. These had a lot of interesting designs for them. They were really ahead of their time. And here's the funny part as far as I'm concerned. If Pontiac themselves would have built ones like this, they probably would have sold like hotcakes. A mid-engine car with this kind of grunt. There's a big difference between this with 305 at the wheel and 92 horsepower at the crank. Those things were putting out barely 80 to the wheels. This is a lot of fun. The other ones, yeah, little turdy things going around, didn't have enough power to pull themselves from here to there. But you don't have to go this insane. Maybe do a little bit of tuning on it, and they're still fun to drive around. And truth be told, you can get these things dirt cheap. Say the only thing you can find are four bangers. So take that out, throw it away, put a V8 engine in. You can do whatever you want, since you can get engines like these 3800s in junkyards all over the place. You're not going to get a blueprinted one like this, putting 310 horsepower to the wheels, but you can get ones that run pretty good when you consider you got a full-size Buick running with a 3800 and you put it in this little car. It's a lot of power, and the 3800s are one of the most dependable, if not the most dependable V6 engine that GM ever put out. And really, when you check it out, it may be 1988, but it's pretty much a classic style. It has nice lines. Since it's got a composite body, you don't have to worry about rust. And for you Japanese car aficionados, it was a Japanese engineer who was the head of the project. Close your eyes, open them again. You can see a lot of Nissan in these if you look closely enough. And I'm not talking modern Nissan, I'm talking back in the day when they were called Datsun. And they made excellent little sports cars. This thing, with a little teasing when they came out with it in the first place, if they wouldn't have put those underpowered engines in them. But the way that I read they put into the sales was it's going to be a commuter car for women. And they didn't think they wanted the speed and that. Well, let me tell you something. They don't know much about women. Women like speed just as much as men do. And you give them a little 92 horsepower thing with an automatic transmission. Hey, they weren't happy with it either. If they would have just put in decent 3800s in them all, hey, they could have become extremely popular. But of course today, I mean, everybody's into the SUVs or trucks where they make most of their profit. Sports cars and sporty cars, a lot of people like them, but that's not where the markets go. So most companies aren't interested in making the sports cars. And of course, Pontiac doesn't even exist as a brand anymore. But of course, if you know anything about history, that's because GM went bankrupt, took a bunch of government money. One of the deals with the government was you have to become profitable, so they cut Pontiac off entirely. They stopped making those Holdens, which were cool cars. They stopped later in Australia, but they stopped selling the Pontiac G8s over here, and they weren't bad cars either. But when you go bankrupt and you gotta pay the piper, it was cut costs, and that was one of the ways they cut costs, was by axing Pontiac, which is really a shame, because these little cars can be an awful lot of fun. Take advantage of it. You can have an awful lot of fun for a little bit of dollars. You don't have to put $100,000, $200,000 in. You can get these things cheap and do whatever you want, whenever you want. Maybe you want to put a supercharger in it, or maybe you want to be super cheap and put in a 4 that it came with and just tootle around. If it's a standard transmission, let's say you never drive over 80 miles an hour, you won't care. It'd be fun, great gas mileage. I mean, you can do whatever you want with one of these cars relatively cheaply. There's a whole bunch of them in junkyards. Like I said, they sold a whole bunch of them. Compared to the Toyota, they sold almost 3 times as many as the MR2s. And there's a lot of them in junkyards that you can get all kinds of parts dirt cheap. So now you know a little bit more about Pontiac Fieros, the forgotten car that if you ever got passed by this one on the road, you wouldn't forget it all that quickly. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.